Hi everyone, welcome to the webinar. We're going to be discussing how Lucky Brand eliminates inventory guesswork with Celect. Before I get started, just a little bit of housekeeping for everyone. The webinar is going to take about 45 minutes. The last 15 minutes we have kept aside for questions. So you'll see on your screens that you do have the ability to enter any questions, and we'll get to those at the end. Thank you for those of you who sent in questions beforehand. We'll make sure that we answer as many of those as we can at the end of the session. So with that, I wanted to welcome Miles, who has very kindly agreed to share this lucky story with us. So Miles, maybe if I could hand over to you to just share a little bit of your background and your role, and then I'll share a little bit about Celect. So Miles, thank you. Over to you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So I'm Miles. I oversee planning and allocation here at Lucky Brand. I've been with the company about a year and a half. Prior to that, I was in 11 years at J.Crew in the store planning area, and prior with Old Navy, Petco, and Children's Place.
Great, thanks, Miles. And congratulations to Miles and the team, who recently won a Retail Innovation Award for this project that we're going to be sharing with you. So congrats on that, Miles, to you and the team. All right, so before we get started with the lucky story, let me share a little bit about Celect for those of you who aren't familiar with us. So Celect really helps retailers optimize inventory decisions. So we look at what and how much to buy, where to place that inventory, and where to fulfill from if you're doing store online orders being fulfilled from stores. It's all based on AI and machine learning. So on the left-hand side here, you'll see a set of awards that we have received around this and the patents. And on the right, this represents our footprint. So we have three key offerings, fulfillment optimization and allocation optimization, which we'll be covering today. And then we also have a plan and buy optimization. And all of this is built on a common platform. And has a common demand prediction and optimization services. We have about 25 customers, so some of the example logos are at the bottom. And as we look at all of this, the reason we went into the space is that we feel really strongly that customer expectations have changed. So they want to be able to shop anywhere, return anywhere, and receive from anywhere. And a lot of operations and executions have changed. But in general, how people and how retailers make the inventory decisions hasn't changed. So we really look forward to hearing from Miles how he and the team sort of went about looking at some of those inventory decisions, especially in the allocation and fulfillment space, and how they now approach them. So what we'll cover today is a little bit about the Lucky Brand background, some of the inventory challenges, the partnership with Celect, implementation challenges, benefits or ROI, and some lessons learned. So Miles, thank you very much, and we're going to hand over to you so that you can share the story with everyone on the call.
Okay. Okay, I think the screen should be working now. Let's see. Okay. Yep. So for Lucky Brand, we're an LA-based company, primarily denim. Denim penetrates about 40 to 50% of our sales, which obviously comes with very size-intensive product offerings, as well as the other size-intensive areas like shoes. We have about 250 stores spread out between our specialty and outlet. We operate both in US and Canada. We also have a big wholesale area. And e-commerce. And so when we were looking at solutions, we were trying to figure out how do we merge the planning systems in with e-com and the store channel all at the same time, especially as ship from store has become more prevalent within the industry. Okay. So just going to show you a couple slides of kind of our store layout, and then I'll go into the Select implementation. This slide that you're seeing is our store at the Point here in Southern California. We consider this a flagship store for us, really showing the entire assortment of product. I like this slide here, as I was telling people before. This slide makes me super nervous, this photo, because you can see the amount of denim that we have. And so a challenge for any allocation department is really making sure that we are in stock with the sizes as well as identifying, stores that skew the size bias on the left-hand side or the right-hand side of the curve. So with this much denim in store at any given time, this is always our question of how do we measure the in-stocks? How are we making sure that we are doing the best that we can to maintain product assortment levels? Just a few more pictures in, you can see that the product offering, again, anything from outerwear, which obviously has climate implications to it, as well as our tees. That is a real bar in the back. We do have liquor that we serve there to customers at the store in the point. So moving on to the inventory challenges. So there's a few things when we were looking through, and it's a continual issue that we have here. So within planning and allocation, all of our planning tools are in Excel. We do not have a planning system per se, or a PLM. And so there's a lot of room for error, and linking all of the files between the production department, merchandising, us, and it's Excel based, and so it's as good as the formulas and as well as good as the people that are reviewing and planning the system. So really there's not automation on the planning side. The other piece is we wanted to figure out how did we do this end to end. So is there one system or one approach across how we plan e-com, how we plan stores, as well as how we allocate versus the order online, ship from store. So how all of that comes together is one of the continual things we look. As those of you that have been in retail for a long time know that there is no one master planning system and there's no one assortment planning system. So it's hard to find something that is really end to end just because the capability and the needs are different from planning versus allocation. One of the other objectives that we had was really reducing the amount of inventory that we had in Canada, definitely, and then e-commerce. I think, with us launching Ship from Store a couple years ago, we were trying to find the right balance of how much inventory should we keep in the e-com warehouse, which we currently have 3 warehouses, an e-com and a store, both in the US, and then Canada is an omni DC, which services both. So how can we look at the holistic picture of inventory, even though we're separated into 2 different buildings here in the US? Dynamic denim replenishment, as I mentioned, it's 40 to 50% of the business. And how do we get more dynamic about that other than using legacy allocation systems and kind of the let's look back 8 weeks, let's look forward 8 weeks, and where the biases sit there. And then obviously utilizing attributes. So it's been a big conversation, I think, where everyone's going right now is what attributes do you need, which ones are the most effective, and how do you get the attributes to not be subjective, and how do you really go for the attributes that the customer is looking for. And then finally, are there store-specific optimized assortments? So how much leeway do we want to give to, every store having its own assortment versus how do we create a cohesive message within Lucky, and how do we present that message within stores and our product offering? So those are kind of our ongoing thing. I don't think this is unique to us at all, that these are pretty standard kind of inventory management challenges. Buy more of what they love and have less of what they don't. But my boss loves this slide, so let's figure out the problem by using big data that none of us know how to deal with. So obviously lack of data is not one of the issues that we face, but it's how do we put the data to good use, and how do we get machine learning and AI, all of that to help us out, as we have a ton of POS data in stores. We also have e-com data. We have customer, we have loyalty program. There's a lot of data rolling around. And so how do we kind of use that to its best, the best use? So a few things. So partnering with Celect. So last January, so January 18, we signed a contract with Celect to implement all 4 of their modules. So the interesting thing here is the Celect contract was signed on my 3rd day with the company. And so I'll get through that after a while. But really, it was the first few months were really going through all of the requirements, as well as trying to launch this system. So here's where the big piece is with Celect, and I think this is the part that we're interested in, and I'll show you a slide in a second. But basically, this whole approach of shuffling the deck. So what is in the warehouse, and then how does that best match with what an individual store is needing from an assortment standpoint? So the example here is that we use product tiers where our clusters or tiers are assigned at the product level. So, for example, we have a top 50 store buy that we use. We've got all store buys. We've got climate buys. All of those things we kind of predetermine where those products should go. The whole shuffling the deck, there's two pieces that are the important nuance here, is that, in previous allocation ways, if you were walked into $1 million store in Kansas and $1 million store in Indianapolis, you would probably see the same depth of product with those stores, unless there was some, climate distinction sitting in between the two. And so, but what we're able to do with Select is that because they're shuffling the deck and we're saying, okay, we know that we need to send 1,000 units of knits to each of these stores because their sales volume are very similar to each other. What it's looking for is to say, does the Kansas store, do they do better in stripes versus solids? Do they do better in darker colors versus lighter colors? What attributes are there at the product level that we've assigned, as well as where the sales data is from the store to be able to match? So, for example, if you're to use Indianapolis and Kansas again, is that the Indianapolis store, even though they have 1,000 units of knits, may skew, and the depth of stack might be more in blue, green, and red, where in Kansas it might be gray, black, and white. As well as, having lived on the East Coast for a long time, the propensity of stripes selling better in the Northeast, especially during the summer, as well, which is very different from New York City itself and very different from the California vibe that's out here right now. So this is the big piece here. In historic allocation, if you were a top volume store, like the point that I showed on the slide, you would get roughly 3 times the average of everything. So within knits, you would have received 48 units of every single style, and so that the difference in the color nuance or stripe versus solids would only be dictated by how much depth was purchased as a company, instead of what is the attribute that really tells you the story, and to get down to the granular level. So I'll cover shuffling the deck in a second a little bit more. The concept of over-recommending is also interesting to us. As I mentioned, the 50 store buy was really our top 50 stores in the company. So what Select is able to do is it looks to say, how much inventory do you have available for the style? What is your sales plan for the style? Of how many units do you think you'll need based on these 50 stores? And we've told Select which 50 stores it is. We feed over our current tiers. When we optimize the allocation, Select will come back occasionally and say, you actually need to send this to 58 stores or 62 stores, because either, one, we have more than enough inventory that it doesn't believe necessarily that we're going to get to the optimized sales that we need, and two, that there are stores out there that match the attributes of the product that we may not have even considered. And so before. So it may recommend 58 or 62 stores, even though we had said you must send it to these 50. Examples of this would be Myrtle Beach in the summer, and so it does a little bit of the seasonality in there, but again, blue and white striped shirts in the Northeast or the Eastern Seaboard is definitely where you want to put your money in the middle of summer. So there's this over-recommending thing. The big piece there is that allocations are being made real time and is at the product, and that the store tiers are really down to the style level. The big piece here, and I think this is where we go, what is fully optimization versus, what is kind of our standard practice is. At the end of the day, you want to be able to let visual know and let the stores know kind of what their product assortment is. So what we're doing is we're using a little bit of a hybrid here. So graphic tees, which have a permanent table fixture within a store, is we're working with merch right now to say, okay, show me what 15 graphics that you want in every single store to tell a story, whether 2 or 3 of those are music or moto, our motorcycle line, any of those things, and then tell me which ones that you actually don't care necessarily about where they go. You just want the best sell-through, because the graphic tee at the end of the day is a commodity item. Don't tell merch I said that, but it's kind of a commodity item. And so what we're doing now is to say, okay, we know these 15 we want to go to all stores, but Select, you choose the rest based on where the demand is and the attributes. So again, it's attributes on short sleeve versus long sleeve. It's attributes on the country music versus our old legacy of, gambling or alcohol, those pieces. So we're trying to find that hybrid, because we can balance letting the stores know of, hey, you're getting 40 types of graphic tees versus I need you to place the California bear on the top left of the table and the lucky clover at the bottom right. We're doing that in dresses. We're doing that in a few more categories. Jewelry is one, where we're trying to back off the restraints that we put into the system to fully optimize. This is the difference if you ask a data scientist what you should do versus us versus how we execute this. So we're really trying to go through, and now that we're comfortable with the system, backing off of our self-imposed constraints. Enhanced store e-com fulfillment. So before we have a third party that runs our warehouses, and we're tied to their OMS. But with Celect, we installed their version of Fulfill from Store last May. And so in the past, it was a waterfall-based decisions, really, where the proximity to the customer and then who has the most inventory, which was obviously causing us stockouts in our best stores, because obviously our best stores are located in the most populous area and the proximity to the customer. The switch for Celect is really an algorithm or a pie chart, which takes in proximity to the customer, inventory available, but it was weeks of supply that was really missing from the old OMS, which now we've put Celect in. We call it the number 2 position. So once that the third-party OMS decides that it needs to involve a store to fulfill an item, Celect will come and choose that store for us based on the algorithm. And so this was an immediate change. The fulfillment is really a black box that gets plugged in with very few requirements on our side. It's really about the data feed. And then the allocation was a little bit more custom to us, as well as we were the first client to Celect integrated with JDA. And JDA is really our mechanism to release to the warehouse. Within the JDA tool, Celect, within Celect really does our replenishment at denim down to size, color, waist, inseam. And in fashion, it does it down to style, color. Within the next month, Celect will be taking over the initial allocation down to size on all of our fashion buys, incorporating the pre-pack as well as taking that over. So in this point, JDA really is the mechanism to release to the store. It also holds some of our store groups, but we've really pretty much just integrated fully with it. I just wanted to show this screen. This is actually our UI screen in the Select module. This is some of our denim that we have. And what I was describing is on the far left, you can select all of your inventory in denim all at once, how many units that you want to allocate, which here it's the inverse, so it's how much you put back into reserve. And it'll look at all of those fits, colors, washes, and then based on the need for the store, say, okay, I know I need to send 300 units to Time Warner this week. Let me see what I've got in the warehouse that best matches their sales. And so it's very, it's pretty cool of being able to select everything at once, which is different from historical allocation systems. Okay. Implementation challenges. So I want to be super clear about really some of the stuff that we saw. So the timeline, really was the timeline of we probably should have spent more time on the requirements prior to signing up for the timeline. We did delay our implementation a few months so that Select could really go after the denim replenishment. And again, with 50% of our sales coming from denim, we wanted to make sure that was perfect. Fulfillment was on time. I think we were within a day of the original timeline. Again, that is just black box for us. The biggest piece from an implementation challenge was the fact that we have a third-party warehouse and third-party OMS. So it wasn't our team. We also had to integrate from their IT department. Attributes are a big conversation always of example. Currently, historic legacy in the system is we have 76 different attributes for fabric, which, I didn't know there were 76 different fabrics in the world, but evidently that's where we were. So it's honing this down to really say, how many do we need? So when I was talking about the graphic tees, we only use 6 attributes for all of those. And it's really, what is the customer facing? And I think that this is where, having been at a conference a couple of weeks ago, this was one of the questions from another company. So how many attributes are there? How many do you need? And which are the most predictive? So that was one of the things of the huge cleanup that we did on our attribute side in simultaneous with the implementation. Integration with third-party OMS, which I discussed, integration with JDA. Because we had the legacy system of JDA, we wanted to be able to see what Select's recommendations were versus JDA. So there's a little bit of custom work on the JDA side so that we could see the recommendations side by side before we release them, because we wanted to know what would the system have done. Integration of master data. So we have NetSuite as our system of record for mainly product attributes, but inventory sits really in a full circle. So it's not that we have one system of record here, we really have two. So getting that into the JDA. And then the implementation is the lack of reporting. I think because, Select really does a lot of custom. And so especially on the allocation side is how do we all define the metrics and what do we look for? So, I think we're all used to the standard metric, sales, cost, sales, margin, turn. But because Select is using down to the granular level, when you're trying to aggregate that up, sometimes you miss what the real benefit is to be able to articulate it because it's making real-time SKU level decisions. And so that's the big piece. So what you think might be happening might be different. So we've, once you get down to the lower level. And then at any point with any time that you're dealing with data scientists and or engineers, it's just translating retail language was just one of the things that we translated. But as Select has added more people that are, from the retail industry, more planners, allocation, this has definitely been a lot easier as we go forward for the translation, as well as, every company has different nuance of what we talk about. And so I think it's just making a master definition as we go along. Benefits. Okay, so fulfillment prioritization, so really going down and doing the weeks of supply count was really where the benefit was. And so what we saw was that immediately that our high volume stores were not getting as many reg fulfillment orders, and that those orders were being pushed down to the lowest volume stores in the company, which is helping us get the better sell-through. At the same time, on the allocation side, those stores are getting less depth, and we're working on getting them less assortment at the bottom. So having fulfillment and allocation running together kind of muddies the results a little bit, but in terms of it's an overall package that's helping you on the initial and then on the fulfillment, and you see that hand in hand. It's a little bit hard to understand which one pushed harder on the lever, but from the fulfillment, when we look at what the upside is against what the old OMS, the third-party OMS would have done versus what they did, Select did. And so when we measure it, we're really looking for that penetration of orders going to low volume stores. The one nuance here is that high volume stores continue to see a lot of markdowns coming out via ship from store. And the reason for that is our high volume stores are not necessarily our highest square footage stores, which I think is the case for most people. And so Select is seeing that the stores don't have all the markdowns represented on the floor, and why it's grabbing so many markdowns basically from the back room. So it's doing what it needs to, and that's where, when looking at the benefits, we do split out reg versus markdown because they tell two separate stories for us within fulfillment. On the allocation module, we started this, with our fall 3 initials, so roughly we went live around 8/15 last year. So fall and holiday was allocated. We really saw the benefit on the sales, and where Select's showing this upside is against what the old allocation system would have done. And I think that's a pretty easy one in terms of prior to installing Select, the point may have received 3% of the company inventory. Now they might receive 3.4% of the company's inventory because it's being taken from stores at the bottom who didn't need that much depth. And I think this is where we see it. If we annualize that out, that's about $2.9 million in upside, including denim. So this is one of those things too, is that, in holiday, our sales were much better than they were the previous year. And so, we saw the whole base move up. And so part of this is when Select comes through to say, like, here's what you would have done in the past. It's an easy way to check and balance that to say, wow, we are seeing improved margin in these stores. And it's an easy pre-post to say, wow, here's where it would have been, or here's where stores are getting less inventory. Here's stores that roughly took the same. What was surprising to me was really the size replenishment. Is once they took over size replenishment, the stores saw an immediate change to it. So One quote that's in here is, every replenishment carton counts. Previously, we'd sort through replenishment to find what we really needed to get to the floor. Now all styles matter. And so the fact that we got the field to give us kudos every time that, the team walks into a store is huge for us. And so when we first were rolling this out to the DMs last summer, there was a lot of trepidation of like, what does this mean? I don't understand shuffling the deck. If I'm out of blue, are you going to give me green? And so there was a lot of hesitance. And then as soon as they saw it coming through, they were getting the hang of the replenishment, and it was feeling very different to them, which is awesome. Lessons learned. So here, this is all of it, like purely transparent. But implementation team structured with a business lead from planning and allocation, meaning me, and an IT lead. So, and the reason for this was having Select signed on my third day was really we went after someone who knew IT and then myself, and we worked in tandem. I think if to do it again, if someone more tenured, as in if we were installing it now, there would be one business lead that would oversee the entire project and splitting it into two. I think what we saw was by splitting it into two, that there were pieces as we got closer that I was missing that of the decisions that some of them made, and so we needed to go back and have IT feed over some more data that I would have caught having known more about how the IT runs here. Integration is 100% depend on how easily data flows between the systems. So again, this is an IT requirement, and then how the feeds are going between the two. Again, we have two systems of record here. Completely surprised by the adoption success with allocation. The allocation team was on board with this day one. There was no ramp up of getting comfortable with it. We also, when we assigned who our SMEs were and the ones that we're testing, were the most senior allocators who know the ins and outs of how JDA works, as well as what they were seeing, and they were on board. They love it. So I was really surprised. Everyone asked me about attrition or staffing. So the previous year we had 8 allocators, 2017, so prior to Select. Last year we had 6 through attrition, although I will caveat that one moved over to kind of handle our attributes and a little bit more pre-work in store planning, but we would not have been able to have 6 allocators this year if Select hadn't been in to make it a lot more efficient. I think when you're able to allocate an entire department at a time, as opposed to going line by line, that's the big benefit. We do use the plan and buy metric, or plan and buy modules, which we really didn't cover here. So I'm going to skip that part. But we do see that there's really speed and efficiency within those modules in terms of how long it takes us for pre-season. Next steps. So here's what we're doing. We continue to work through enhancements. At any given time, we have 2 or 3 enhancements done. There's pretty much they're not on the UI. We solved all of those last year. There were just some quick wins for the team. As I mentioned, we're going to be working on replenishment by size for fashion goods. That is going on now. Currently, Select recommends a style color, and then JDA does the size curve. But within the next month, we will be on 100% of Select doing all of the size replenishment, as well as fashion initials down to size as well. And then we continue to pop around if it's, it's the forecasting, how can we use it as a basics management tool? Is there a way within some of the optimizations really in plan and buy that we could say, like, could we have it forecast our reorders for us at fit? Could it reforecast for us of how much inventory it wants to have on a monthly basis, or BOP? So how do we use a hybrid? That's not really how that tool was made, but we're trying to always figure out, now that we have all this data in a super easy way, how can we manipulate it on our side to kind of drive? Finalizing the reporting ROI metrics that we just finished last week. There's a new version of plan and buy, the other 2 modules this holiday, we're hoping. And then we're reducing the constraints, which I mentioned. It's really around store groups at this point. And the merchants have been really open to saying, yeah, I know I bought this for all stores, but why don't you tell me how many stores it actually needs to go to? Maybe we've missed something. In the categories that are very, like dresses is one where you're coming in, you want the pattern and print in there, but at the same time, there may not be a differentiation other than you want to make sure that there's a represented of a classic body versus one of the new bodies. So This is what we're working on right now, and then all of our departments will have this kind of what we're calling the free tier in fall to really unconstrain as much as we feel comfortable and as we learn. Andrea, I think that's it. If you want to take back over the controls.
All right, great. Thanks, Miles. So just a reminder to everyone, if you want to put any questions in, go ahead and add them under the questions area. So Miles, while you were speaking, we did get a couple in. So the first one was really asking a little bit about how you address your stores or store groupings as you think about what you're going to buy. So in the upfront buying and planning decisions.
Okay, sure. So we really do store groups kind of outside the system to an extent. And, so going with our standard, but I think this is the piece where we have the opportunities we recap, and as we're going to loosen the constraints, to redo and say, okay, when Select went to allocate, I'm going to use jewelry as an example, that we can, once we get through the next couple months where jewelry has been allocated really with that free tier, we can go back and say, well, how many CCs did each store get? And so then I think we can take a look to say, wow, okay, we know that we have, the bottom 65 stores in one store group, but the way that Select's optimizing the allocation, there's a consistent theme that it's the bottom 30 that they're really taking a whack out of the amount of CCs that they should have based on sell-through. And so from a preseason standpoint, should we make those 30 their own tier? From a pre-planning standpoint, I think, one of the things that Select has within the buy and plan module is CC recommendation, but just the way that we feed our data over, we, can put our store groups in, and Select will give us a kind of a TYLY percent to take the CCs down. So we kind of look to say how aggressive should we be within the tiers, but we're constantly re-looking at where the standard deviation sits within the tiering, but we do kind of take a nod to it within the departments.
Great, thanks, Miles. Another question that came in was really asking about the makeup of the allocation team, which you did share. But the second part of that question was really around, did this change what allocators spent their time on, and if so, how did it? What type of impact did that have?
Yeah, I think where the workload goes into is really the pre-planning, especially on the denim team, to really understand how much they want to allocate each week. One of the things that Select is working on as an enhancement, which we're working through requirements now, is for Select to try and help us with what should our initial commit percentage be? How much should we be allocating on a weekly basis based on the demand that we're out there versus how much, legacy of like, oh, I'm going to go out 65% committed and I'm going to pre-pack to 52%. So looking at those things. So the teams are really spending more time in that, the allocation tiering part and the outbound number as opposed to the actual execution of the allocations themselves. They are still double checking within JDA before they release, but that's going much quicker at this point to just make sure. I think the denim team spends a little bit more time just to see what the final number is at down to dimension, what we call dimension, so inseam waist. But the fashion allocators really are going much faster because it's an in and out business for them, and so they're able to work on more sizing, those kind of things.
Okay, great. All right, so I guess the other the other question was really around, there's quite a few coming in actually. So this one was really around the adoption, and I know you'd mentioned earlier that the solution was easy to adopt. And the question really related to what type of training did you have to do for the allocation team?
Sure. So we had two allocators that really were helping us during the requirement session to really what the look and feel of the UI needed to be. And again, coming off of the JDA or using JDA, we tried to replicate from a user experience about the same way. Because we had those two allocators with us during some of the design sessions, they were able to say, here's what it should look like, and this is going to be what's intuitive for us. So because we did that front end, when we got to the actual training, it was roughly a 3-day training session. The first day was really kind of what the tool does, some of the nuances in it. The second day was watching the two allocators, show the whole process. There is, for us, because there's an allocation system, we do our allocations in the morning, send to Celect, and in the afternoon, it pops into JDA, which is then when we release it. So, part of the training had to be that full day because there was the early morning optimization and then seeing the results in the afternoon. And then the third day was, I believe Celect had 2 or 3 people on site. And so they just sat with each allocator in the morning and actually did allocations with them. And then coming out of that training, there were a couple of UI changes that we made, or a couple things, but it was really, I would say, 3 days on site, and then they were on standby during our allocation hours for the next week, and that we could Zoom or remote in with them as they were showing some nuance. But really, the training, and it went super fast, and I think there's just weird nuances with some of where our data was sitting that we didn't realize until we put through. Like, there's a NetSuite doesn't allow you to reclass, and so there was one hat that we couldn't seem to allocate for whatever reason. So it was just because it was sitting in some obscure old hierarchy. But for the most part, everything flowed through the system.
Great. Another one on the allocation side, it's, does Lucky consider capacity in allocation as you allocate it? If so, how?
For denim, yes. We do have some, I believe we have some maxes, min-max. We do use min-max, which we feed to Celect. We feed the minimum to Celect in denim replenishment. We leave the max open-ended so that Celect can fully recommend. But from capacity, we really don't try and override it, but it's the denim team that looks at the capacity. Because we've reduced our CC counts over the last year, we're not running into capacity issues in stores. At this point, we don't use it as a toggle until we get really into holiday to really understand, and that's really a function of how low should we go committed to understand what's going to happen from a capacity standpoint.
Okay, great. So now a couple of questions on the fulfillment side. The question is, did the fulfillment optimization offering have any organizational impact? And if so, what changes might that have did you have to put in place?
I would need more background on that one. We had already had Ship from Store live for probably 6 months on the outlet channel and a year on the specialty side or full price side. So I can't think of any changes that were there. And again, it's black box, so it's not visible to the field team because it comes into play within the OMS, and so the orders and everything else look identical to the stores. And again, I think the other talking point here is we didn't see a giant reduction overall in the amount of units going to each store that they would need to change their staffing plan. It would just change the content. So Time Warner Center in New York, instead of sending out, let's say 100 units a week that were a mix of reg and markdown, now they do 90 units of markdowns going out the store and 10 of reg. So from how many units are going out the door, that didn't change. It's just that the inverse in bottom stores saw more reg coming out of the store than markdowns, but no changes that I can think of.
Okay, great. All right, so this one goes back to allocation again. And the question is, what is the ratio of your allocation replenishment to sort of the short life side?
Sorry, can you repeat that one?
Yeah, so it's basically asking what is the ratio when you look at your merchandise that you're allocating, how much of it is sort of replenished versus how much of it is more of a push model?
Oh, got it. Okay. I would say 35% we would consider, 35 to 40% across, we would consider either 12-month basics or 6 months from that standpoint, and the rest really is fashion. So with a 8-week, most of our fashion is bought at 8 weeks. We are increasing the penetration of quarterly basics, currently in graphic tees in both genders, as well as shoes and a little bit of jewelry. But the nuance here is we do not have auto replenishment for anything. So we hand quote unquote allocate everything. We don't put things on auto. And one of that was we used to put some denim on auto replenishment, but our inventory in the DC was never enough, and we were nervous about doing that. But with Select, Select's recommendation was to not put things on auto so that Select could inform what those decisions are. I think there's probably some auto replenishment we could probably add, but we're so down to detail in denim. But I will caveat that with 250 stores, there are only 2 denim allocators, but they are spectacular at what they do. But their comfort level is really looking and understanding what's going on and using Select as opposed to using auto allocation through JDA, because the metrics are different and the sales demand is different.
Great. All right, so I don't know if I have enough context for this question, but let me try it. So it's basically say there's a question on how many DCs you have, if it's one or many, and then the second part of it is, do you use a 3PL, and if you're using 3PL, do you use one or many?
Okay. We have 3 warehouses. Currently, we are moving to, we'll have 2 in the fall, but currently in the US, we have a DC that fulfills for our stores and the wholesale departments. That's based here in California. And then our e-com DC is in Louisville. We are merging those 2 together. And so we will have one DC and then one pool of inventory, which we are, there's a little bit of Select work that has to be done on it, with the integration, as well as we're hoping that our fulfill from store goes down substantially once we merge the 2 DCs. In Canada, we have 1 DC, and that's an Omni DC. It serves stores and e-commerce and wholesale as well. From a 3PL standpoint, we use ground shipping for almost everything. We don't LTL at all, so it's really the ground shipping, and it's one to 2 vendors. I think it's 1, but I think we're just in the process of renegotiating right now.
Great, thank you. And I think time for one more question. And this question is, what order management system are you using, and have you integrated Select's fulfillment optimization to that?
Yes, we use our e-com facility is Radial, so we use Radial's OMS, and Select was integrated within the Radial OMS. We are moving to Radial's new version of their OMS in August. And so we're going through the requirements with Select right now to make sure that we put them into the right portion within the third-party OMS as well. Okay,
great. All right. Well, thank you very much, Miles, for sharing sharing the lucky story with us. I want to let everyone know that if you do want to learn any more, here are the links. You can go and find out a little bit more about allocation optimization and fulfillment optimization. There were a few questions that we weren't able to get to, so we will make sure that we respond to everyone on the questions that you put forward. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending the webinar, and big thank you to you, Miles, for sharing your story. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.